90% of the entire Nazi German army were on amphetamines during World War II is because it's been shown to suppress empathy, to make you feel like Superman.
I realized nobody was getting better from avoidance. So pure avoidance, I realized, wasn't making people better. Matter of fact, quite the opposite. They were actually all getting worse.
People could just have amalgam fillings and end up sicker and more psychotic and in a worse place than a person who got hit by an IED.
Detox has to be at the cellular level. That's where real detox is.
We haven't quite got to the place where people really understand the bioaccumulation issue. It's not just about what you're eating today, it's about what's accumulated over years in your body.
I call it a perfect storm. Typically, it's 3 stressors that come together: physical, chemical, emotional, and it doesn't matter. Boom! 12 days without food or water, survived. Oh, not only survived, but it was the start of his recovery and thriving. Okay, you're going to hear that whole story. You're going to learn about kava. Matter of fact, this guest, we nicknamed him Kava Cam. There's a certain strain of kava that can absolutely, well, it helped him get off a drug called Klonopin, and you're going to hear that whole story and how something called TRU KAVA was born. But Cam, welcome to the Dr. Pompa podcast.
This would be my favorite place to be, probably.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Listen, y'all have to know that, you know, gosh, how many years ago was that where you were one of my first, well, not one of my first clients with dealing with some of the stuff that you dealt with.
Maybe
when
one
you
of
first
maybe you're
yeah.
only ever with some of this stuff.
Yeah, I would say you were the first like super, super, super hard client that, you know, was sent home to die type client.
Yeah, like the term throwaway, it sounds harsh and it is harsh, but that's essentially like what I was, right? You know, it was like doctors, I think probably, maybe not to my face, maybe to my parents or something, kind of is like, okay, there's not much hope here type of thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, how did he get there? Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about monkeys and exotic animals and pets and maybe even Best Buy, but
they're going out as that
we don't
tight.
want to go there. All right. But no,
This has never gone on this show before.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, fact is you were sent home to die. We'll get there in a minute. But let's talk all the way about where it all started, because at one point, you know, you were thriving. I don't know. Maybe I'll let you describe it. I don't know. If
I mean, thriving is a loose word.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a strong word, but I wasn't like, it wasn't a complete disaster. Well, I mean, I probably would have said that I was thriving, right? But now my life resembles
you
something
still had a lot of
different.
addictions, right?
Oh, for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's start there. You were a kid with a lot of addictions, probably a little too much energy, probably had a diagnosis of ADD, ADHD at one point. I don't even know. But you found your way into long distance running and some other things to kind of combat that. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd say I was kind of from the beginning, or growing up, I was in a situation that a lot of young guys, kids are in, and a lot of parents are in too, speaking from the vantage point of like what my parents were going through with me. You know, I was just a little bit of a problem child to some degree, right? Like not always getting in trouble. I'd go into spurts of getting in trouble, but I definitely had sort of, instabilities, and had, definitely a high proclivity towards compulsivity, impulsivity, addictions, all that kind of stuff, which sometimes would come up looking really functionally great, right? Where I would like really shine at something.
Yeah, you were
like
number one
hardcore.
salesman at Best Buy.
Sure, sure, yeah. Got that going for me. Yeah. But yeah, whenever I actually focused on anything, just like a lot of people that are in this sort of like wiring functional spectrum, right? That's like we put all these names and labels on it, which I'm not always a fan of, except for just like referring to a pattern. But sometimes, you put a label on something and then you develop an identity around it. And then the assumption comes that that's just who you are.
Yeah, false
like,
identity.
I'm ADHD, I'm depressed.
Yeah,
absolutely. That'd be like saying I'm chest pain, or something.
Yeah,
It's like, there's like 100 ways to arrive there.
Yeah.
And yeah, in some people, it can be more deeply embedded than others, right? As we know now. And it may take a lot to sort of just excavate those patterns, but there's almost not any functional or behavioral pattern that I've learned today that can't be changed with the right strategy if you're willing to go deep enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but I kind of had a lot of the things that kids have today, but I was probably on, the more extreme side of certain things. knowing now, I had a lot of deficits. I had metabolic syndrome, right? I had neurotoxicity. I had a lot of these things, these stressors that we had. I mean, obviously, anyone who listens to this show has probably heard the bucket theory before, right? It was just all the stressors.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt your bucket started filling in utero, right? Where most of right? You got certain heavy metal exposures during in utero, right? And then throughout life. And then we come to the fun part of the story that you, for whatever reason, I'll let you tell the story, you started collecting exotic animals and, in an apartment.
Yeah.
What was up with that?
Yeah. And
there's a point to this, trust me.
And not even to make it sound like that growing up, I was extremely off the reservation. I had all of what we would consider the signs of, fragility and high susceptibility, probably genetic susceptibility, which led to enough deficits in the brain and the nervous system that I ended up with a lot of compensatory behaviors to try to normalize myself unconsciously, which is where a lot of kids are. It's like, we don't know.
Yeah.
I couldn't have sat down and be like, oh, well, I have low dopamine levels or my mitochondria are stressed or something.
Right,
It's you're just a kid and you're trying to self-soothe. You're trying to feel good.
Yeah, you just knew when you ran like crazy and you ran for miles and miles, you felt a little better.
Yes.
Yeah.
I felt a little better both physically and then I felt better about myself because then I didn't feel so dysfunctional in so many different ways, right? But then, you end up on these addictions, food addiction, to compensate, which, eventually leads to all kinds of behavioral addictions and then drug addictions and so on and so forth. But one of the things that I attached to, you alluded to, is I became a distance runner. It's not, that out of the ordinary that someone with some pre-existing impulsivities and maybe some pre-sickly state like syndromes would end up in that sport because it's one that's highly addictive on the nervous system, and it's one that you can just like repeat and do the same thing, rinse, repeat, get the feeling, rinse, repeat, get the feeling. Don't have to rely on anybody else. It's an individual sport. So that became sort of like my drug of choice at an early age, right? So and I got really good at it, and I was successful, and I ran in college at the University of Arkansas, and was very successful in that sport. Both as a marathon runner and on the track and all that stuff. And so it was like my life. It was my identity. It was my world. But I got to a point where I was running in college, and I was training excessively year round, as someone who has a predisposition to addictive behavior does, right? So
you were overtraining.
Yeah, because I had cross country season in the fall, I had indoor track and outdoor track in the spring, and then I would race marathons at a really too early age, right? At 19 years old. But I got to the point where the bottom started to fall out, where I wasn't recovering. I mean, kind of like your story, right? Where it's like you just thought you're overtraining, which I was. That was definitely part of it, probably more so than you were. You were probably more responsible with it than I was. But yeah, I started to just get very, very emotionally destabilized, chronically fatigued. And I was used to a level of chronic fatigue because I was just had a proclivity towards overdoing things or burning things out or whatever. But it became excessive. It became to a point where I just wasn't able to recover. I wasn't able to adapt anymore. So, most of the time in the past, I would do these I would do, 160-mile weeks for a whole semester. And then I would kind of crash for a few weeks. And then I would just naturally recover to a good degree to where I could hit it again. But this time I wasn't. It was like the spring of, I think, 2008 or 2009. Where I just ended up on the couch and I just could not get off. As much as like I couldn't even get off the couch really to find the motivation or find the willpower to run, to go to work. I went through like several jobs at the time because I just like could not find. I ended up in a situation where I was just completely void of physical willpower, which was out of the ordinary for me because I'm not a lazy person at all, right? But so I remember even my parents at the time, I came home from the house that I was living in, and I just sort of like ended up like back at my parents' house, and I wasn't really like expressing a lot of it because it was just sort of like, whenever you're that age, it makes you feel like weak to do so, right? And there wasn't any place in which I thought that there was any real answers. It was just like, I'm not working hard enough, or I worked too hard for a while and now something's going on. But I also got an injury around that time too, and I think that was actually what started it.
Repetitive injuries typically happen first.
Yeah, exactly.
But you justify it away.
Yeah, and so that kind of all came to a head at the same time, right? Severe, I would say debilitating chronic fatigue in conjunction with, overuse injuries just led to kind of like a temporary caving of my existing identity, right? Because being that age, and as kind of trivial as it sounds, to have your entire identity locked into like just a sport that you're playing, you know, like in college. Well, you know, to me anyways now, you know, from this vantage point, but that's your whole life. That's your whole world at that point in your life, right? And that was where I got my sense of meaning. That's where I got my sense of purpose, my sense of strength, everything, right? Was sort of tied into that thing. And, you know, that was what I wanted to do.
So now it's gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Identity, you know,
yeah,
without
exactly.
identity.
And so there was kind of all this stuff happened at once, but it was that portion of it. But then also, you know, once I couldn't run anymore for a number of months, it was sort of like, you know,
now what?
Yeah, I became, I became massively actually like clinically depressed and everything. But then I just wasn't recovering. It was like month after month.
I mean, okay, so there was the, you know, physical exertion here that was an issue. And okay, then how did it lead in, and there is a point to this, to collecting exotic animals?
Yeah.
And I mean this when I say there's a point here.
Yeah, exactly.
It led to an exposure. Wait till you hear this.
Yeah. You know, and the reason why I give so much buildup is just to kind of paint the picture of like all of these sort of micro variables that lead to a system collapsing, which led to me doing something extreme out of desperation, which I ended up in a psychiatrist's office, which is actually not my default setting at all. I didn't want to do that, but I dragged myself in there kicking and screaming because I wanted to be functioning again. And I had people around me because I'm from Arkansas, which is, you know, a part of the country even to this day that's not like super progressive from a health technology sense or anything. And so like the only form of like medicine or care whenever you had a questionable situation going on, especially back then, was the standard allopathic model, right?
Okay, I was going to make a joke. I was going to say crack or meth because, well, do you see the Netflix series Ozarks, right? It's like, so we were teasing him before he got on the show. It's like, you know, I'm from the Ozark area, you know, I'm like, oh yeah.
I mean, usually I get the sort of eyebrow raise anywhere we travel or go to conferences or whatever. They ask me where I'm from. I say Arkansas, and clearly you don't see people in our circle from Arkansas that much. It's just not something that tends to overlap. Yeah. And then they're like, oh yeah, Ozark, the meth. Yeah, that's
the
right.
meth. Yeah,
exactly.
Like,
or Bill Clinton, or
one or the other. But yeah,
something.
It was a dark show. I couldn't even get through it. But anyways, okay, yeah. So not a lot to do there.
Yeah, but there is kind of an overlap there in the sense of just like there is a culture around instant gratification, or there wasn't as much of a a culture of you know, looking at things, especially health in terms of depth and like cause, right? Just because that's a more developed perspective on things that requires more introspection. And this part of the country, it's more of a simple life. Right?
Yeah. It can work for you and against you.
Yeah, exactly. There's times when that's good, and it's evolved since then. But like at this time, and it's still kind of like that. But anyway, so I end up in the only avenue that I had, you know, in a kind of, at the time, what I thought was a desperate situation, which was nothing compared to what I ended up in later on, but in a psychiatrist's office where I basically ended up prescribed on was prescribed a slew of medications, the primary one being Adderall, with the amphetamine-based drug, which is where the overlap is with meth, right? Because chemically, I think, and this drives me crazy today, it's like we just kind of need to call it what it is. It's a form of legal meth that's slightly less potent on the front end, but still ultimately leads you mentality-wise and physiologically to a similar place if you use it long enough.
Well, it's like Ritalin. It's like Schedule II drug like cocaine.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's it's call it what it is. It's just, it has a slower rise and a slower fall.
Yeah, it's a more controlled. It's
high,
a more controlled version of it that's orally active instead of smoking through a freaking pipe and in a crystallized form. But it has the same mechanism of action, right? It dumps dopamine in the brain, and it doesn't create any more.
And by the way, kids are trading it and using it, both medications we mentioned, to study.
Yeah.
They're, it's like, and kids are out because it creates great focus.
Yeah.
Evidently.
Well, because it's a performance enhancing drug, right? Like so many performance enhancing drugs, whether you're on gear in the gym trying to be a bodybuilder, or, drugs for the mind like Adderall, Ritalin, or even modafinil to some degree. But I mean, it gives you a result right now, but at the cost of tomorrow. Like all these drugs, all pharmaceuticals, even alcohol, we can even get into this. So many people don't actually really even know how they work. They just say, it gives me this feeling. It gives me this chemical maybe.
But there's a debt to pay.
Exactly, right? It doesn't give you any more dopamine, which would be the main chemical that, say, amphetamines work on. You get this flood dump of dopamine in the brain. So, dopamine is the main, chemical in the brain that elicits a state of energy, focus, motivation, drive, and desire. So you feel like you're super focused and you're getting things done, right? The problem is that it's not creating any more dopamine. It's just plugging into receptors and borrowing from tomorrow's stores to pay for today.
Exactly.
I call it a chemical credit card, right?
Yeah, exactly. One day you got to pay.
Exactly. You got to pay, right? And so it's not only is it not addressing the issue, it's actually bringing you in debt with your body's own energy and its own feel-good chemistry. And so obviously not knowing that at all, but that's the system. That was the only system that I had available to me, was offering, basically. It's like I'm bankrupt, I'm out of money, and I have all the symptoms of being at least headed towards bankruptcy. And then the only person who can give me any advice has a white jacket and a name tag, and they just say, here's this credit card,
So you took it, how long did you take it for?
So I took it for 2.5, 3 years.
Yeah, it worked while you're taking it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it was yeah, exactly. So
till the debt built up and then you had to pay it back.
Yeah, like so many people who go on psychotropic drugs, whether it be off the street or whether it be prescribed, in a pill bottle, from a physician, and go on them regularly, right? You can have this experience where it seems like a miracle at first. A lot of people even kind of ignorantly refer to a drug like Adderall or Ritalin as a miracle drug, right? But yeah, it works. It's just like if I were to...
Got my life back. Whoa, just like that.
Yeah, it's just like if I were to take a massive shot of testosterone, or if I were to go on Anavar or something, it's like, yeah, I'd be lifting heavy as hell in the gym, right?
Yeah.
You get a result. But the question is like, at what cost?
Right.
And there's almost nothing that's more aggressively damaging and depleting to your brain's energy and its mitochondria than amphetamines, right? And it's a reason, if you want to age faster than anyone, I mean, you say obviously spike your glucose more than anything.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would say, sugar, steroids, stress, and stimulants, right?
Yeah, I would agree. Stimulants,
yeah,
exactly. I'm talking about what average people do, right? But those are things that not average people necessarily do. But man, they'll age you faster than anyone.
Well, Adderall usage is more average than most people think.
Yeah,
in different industries,
sadly,
like journalists, the percentage of people that are on Adderall or high performers, like are kind of closet on Adderall, just like a lot of people are on. And
it's, by the way, it's going up every year. There was one year. 2022, was it? 23 or 22. That there was a drop, and it's like, oh wow, are people getting it? No, it was literally they couldn't produce it. There was a drop in supply.
Yeah. Exactly. Maybe they did it on purpose. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? But but it's going up and up because the use. I mean, social media, the amount of toxins that kids are exposed to.
There's so many brain deficits.
Reaching for things, right? Yeah, they're reaching for things, so therefore they end up with these as their.
And to use that analogy, there are so many. Our environment and the stresses of our environment, physical, chemical, emotional, neurotoxicity, all that stuff. Is sapping the currency from our brains and our nervous systems. And so the easy reaches, right, or the quick fixes, just like I did. There's no shame in it. You just don't know. And you're looking for something that works, and you have to function. And so many people are in situations where they can't afford not to function.
So you were left with a great debt to pay.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, you were paying it. You were, obviously forced to stop.
Yeah, so long story short, I got on the drug. Seemed like a miracle at first, right? Just like so many drugs do. Or the first time someone takes cocaine, they probably love it, right? Hardly anyone says, I don't like the feeling from that, whenever you're on it. But if you sort of cut to, a lot of times whenever you're in the midst of drug use or the altered state, especially, Adderall and amphetamines are one of those interesting ones, because at that controlled dose, they give the perceptual feeling that it's actually improving your life because it's a productive drug, right? It's not like heroin where you're zonked out on the couch or whatever.
Yeah, you do more.
You
have more focus.
Exactly. And to people unfortunately, our culture, value in our culture a lot of times is judged by how much you can produce, right? It's just part of what, you know, sort of the Americanized value system has become.
And even how good we feel about ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, you get on it and your perception from the inside, you're only focusing, you know, Tony Robbins would say, you don't experience life, you experience the life you focus on, right? And it's like whenever you're trying to optimize for one metric, that is like your immediate productivity, then it sort of like blurs out everything else. And so all these things that are falling apart because you can't really create true homeostasis chemically in the brain with amphetamine, right? No more can you do it.
So relationships start to go down. Other physical things start to happen.
Or you start to get these like slight and mine was on the extreme end of the spectrum. Sometimes it happens more slightly. But, you know, for me, it's just like this sort of disconnection from reality, right? Like there's a reason why, there's whole books written on this, that's, you know, like 90% of the entire, you know, Nazi German army were on amphetamines during World War II is because it's been shown to suppress empathy, to make you feel like Superman, to give you the feeling of whatever you're doing in that moment is just because you're associating it with this big dopamine spike, right? So it's a lot easier to control people. And it can lead to sort of narcissistic behavior, not that it does to that degree in everybody. But what I'm saying is that it has a proclivity towards cutting you off from emotion and empathy.
Yeah.
So anyways,
you start living a very selfish life.
Yeah.
And to your point, you start ignoring all of these other things.
And you couldn't see. And I say that just because, you know, if you cut to, and you kind of alluded to it at first, it's like if you just like, you know, had a montage and you saw me, you know, smiling and taking my first dose of it, and first day seems to go good, and then cut to, you know, 4 months later, and I've got basically like Jesse Pinkman's apartment from Breaking Bad, with all the speaker equipment everywhere, and people like eating pizza, homeless people eating pizza off the floor, and like there's monkeys hanging from the light fixtures.
Well, see, like, this is coming, you know, actually. This is like, coming. Because, you know, he's saying all this to say how he ended up with all these exotic animals, right? I mean, so I think Jesse Pinkman, is that his name from Breaking Bad? Yeah. I mean, because this is what was happening to him, right? Yeah. I mean, his life as you knew it.
And he was on meth, right? And so it was just kind of a thing. And again, this is an extreme example. This is like an Adderall horror story. But even if it occurs anywhere on the spectrum, that's sort of more of a slow decline. Like it's very rare to me observing someone over a long period of time, especially years, where there's actually a net positive growth trajectory in their life from going on these heavy black box psychotropics, right? And you could put antidepressants in that category too. You know, it's like short-term leverage maybe in some emergency situations, obviously, when someone is completely out of sorts. But I mean, you're ultimately going to end up in a worse place than you started, right? And I was like the extreme example, because the way that I was wired, already hyper impulsive, kind of had a proclivity towards the impulsive compulsive. The worst thing that you could ever put in a person like that's brain is amphetamines, because it's going to take all of that eccentric sort of like impulsivity, and it's going to put it on friggin' steroids. And then you cut to, and I've got, you know, basically I was only, I was 19 at the time, and I ended up in a 700 square foot apartment with hundreds of thousands of dollars of like TV and stereo equipment, because I worked at Best Buy, and I was like buying TVs and flipping them and selling them, not illegal, like using their order management systems to, like, you know, get me employee discounts and stuff.
Okay, as you'll see, Kim is very highly intelligent, and he was outsmarting them at their own game legally.
Resourceful, yeah, exactly.
Resourcefully,
yeah.
But then, needless to say, he became an electronics dealer. Okay,
yeah. And so basically,
he had a lot of money.
I had an electronics dealer that was funding my exotic animal appetite, right?
Okay, so let's talk about the first exotic animal. Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, there's a point here. Yeah. It's part of how he ended up getting really sick.
This is the pain part, right? Yeah. From pain to purpose.
Yeah, right? Exactly. We're getting to the purpose. But these animals did lead to something. Okay, so let's talk about the first animal. What'd you buy?
The first animal was a parrot. It was an African gray.
Everyone starts with a parrot, I think.
Yeah, because a parrot can talk. It sounds fun, right? You get some money, you're 19 years old, you're like at a, you know, you're in college, you're on some blow or amphetamines or whatever, you know, and you just end up like, hey, that sounds fun.
That talks back.
It sounds fun. Yeah, you can teach them to dance.
You forget that they actually live as long as a human, if not longer.
Well, that was one reason I liked it. I was like, hey, I can have this thing forever.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But anyways, just I was basically just tweaking, and these were sort of tweaker.
All right, so you got one, and then I think you got 2 and 3.
Yeah, so I ended up with an African gray. It's like the smartest animal in the world, or one of them. Like it's got like the intelligence of a 5-year-old. You can teach it to sing and dance. I would sit there like tweaked out on Adderall, like with a little metronome, like playing songs, and it was dancing and whatever. So I ended up with a macaw, blue and gold macaw, like a pirate parrot, it's like this big. Right? So you put it in there. So I had those, and I had iguanas. And then I ended up like at one point I had a fish tank in my living room full of piranhas, like
exotic,
carnivorous fish. You feed them like hot dogs, right? You can stick your hand in there and it'll like freaking eat it.
That's cool.
It's like my landlord didn't think it was cool, but that's another thing. But
we're getting there.
But yeah, so then I ended up with monkeys at some point. I ended up with multiple.
Didn't you
monkeys.
actually try to purchase a giraffe?
Well, no. So I actually ended up the places that I ended up going.
Does this? Okay.
I would drive. These drugs, had me such in a state, and it was just like you can just tell, because I wouldn't have done any of this stuff outside of drugs. I had regular levels of impulsivity, like I was addicted to running.
Not then, this.
Cut to amphetamines. It's like Ace Ventura, Breaking Bad. Overlap. Disastrous, yeah, exactly. So I remember driving in the middle of the night and finding these exotic animals, sort of like operations that it wasn't his, but whenever I first saw the documentary during COVID, Tiger King, Joe Exotic, that whole thing, like those were the exact places that I was going to buy these things, right?
Gosh, yeah.
I didn't end up at his, but people that were in that network, there was some in Tennessee, there's some in Oklahoma, some of that, like that. So I was going around to these places and making deals and like buying stuff or whatever. And I got to the point where they were trying to sell me. I was a good customer, right? And they knew that I would probably be interested, and they were offering me an amazing deal to sell me a giraffe, right? And I was just delusional enough that I like almost got it, right? Like that was crazy.
How big of a giraffe? How high do your ceilings have to be?
And mind you, people that know me today don't believe this story sometimes, because I'm actually very like rational, grounded, like sort of fact-based.
Now,
like
we'll talk about how he beat all this.
And I was telling you, this is an anti-drug story. This is why.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, no, it's just like I wasn't thinking long-term. I was thinking, I'm tweaking out. You want to sell me a giraffe?
Yeah, so
I can afford it.
How big did you see the giraffe? Or they were telling you?
Oh no, yeah. Because I was walking around they had giraffes.
Okay. How tall was the giraffe?
Oh, in feet. I mean, imagine how tall a giraffe is. Reach
a
second-story building,
than
whatever.
This room. Yeah.
I was in a 700 square foot apartment.
So did they ask how high your ceilings were?
No, they don't care.
Yeah, so they just want to sell you the giraffe. You'll figure that out later.
Yeah. Well, and then I came probably even closer. That one, pretty quickly, I was like, even if I rent a house, put it in the backyard, even
that was getting a little sloppy.
Exactly. To me, even the state of mind I was in, right?
Yeah.
But I almost actually did buy a lion cub or a tiger cub. There was because they were going to give me an amazing deal on that, and that would have been another disaster, right? So
I mean, it really sucks these places exist.
For sure.
Do these places still exist, or is this like
probably less after? I'm not keeping up with it.
Thank God. I'm not laughing at the fact that this would happen.
No.
I'm laughing at you. I'm sorry, but I am. But no, I mean, this is sad because someone might have actually purchased that giraffe, and what is that poor giraffe?
It's heartbreaking, right? It's only hilarious because of how crazy it is.
I know,
because some things end up in such lunacy territory that you just have to laugh because it's great. It's like watching any of these shows that depict this kind of stuff. But it's crazy because I was relatively, proclivity towards some childhood impulsivity, but I still was in a realm of normalcy, right?
Yeah, right.
And then I go on these drugs.
He didn't purchase the giraffe. That's a realm of normalcy.
No, but I ended up with a lot of monkeys though.
How many monkeys?
Well, I had 3 was the most I ever had at once, and I had Java macaques, and I had spider monkey or capuchin, and then I had a Rhesus monkey at one point. And the Rhesus monkeys are like small baboons. It's like what you see in the studies.
Yeah. Okay. So 700-foot apartment with monkeys. You have to understand, folks. monkeys destroy things. Monkeys
Everything.
piss everywhere. They'll throw poop at you.
Yeah.
I mean, and all this happened.
Steal your keys.
All this happened, right? I mean, there was pissing and pooping going on in the 700. Am I right? Okay.
Absolutely.
And were you cleaning it appropriately?
No. Well, this is relevant too. Like, I promise we're going somewhere with all this.
I know. We really are. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I end up in this situation, and by the way, anytime you see like a complete catastrophic disaster take place, like ground zero, if you were to walk into this, you would just, like any regular person would just be horrified. It's like off of a reality TV show that's like,
did you bring like any normal humans into this surroundings? Like,
but not normal humans. Like the people eating pizza off the floor, so they were down with it, right? So the first normal human that actually came in was eventually when my parents like found me, did a little intervention on me, and came in, and
your dad came in and saw this.
I mean, I don't think I've ever seen horror like that on a human's face, right? It was so bad.
So here's a funny part of this story is the landlord suspected this behavior. And you would avoid him. You wouldn't let him in, right? I mean, because people would say, we heard monkeys squealing. We heard that, and you denied it all.
Well, that's why if you've ever seen that first Ace Ventura movie, it was the exact same thing. His landlord was like waiting for him every day and like trying to like, cross paths with him. And he's like, I heard animals in there, Ventura. I heard him scratching around. He's like, I don't bring my work home with me, sir. And it was that kind of thing, right? Whereas like, this guy was like from Syria, and he was the manager of this apartment complex. His name was Ubab, and he hated me. He obviously knew, but he's like couldn't prove it. He couldn't come in there. And I would like get there like really late at night and like park in the back parking lot and like run up in there or whatever. And you could hear, because during the day there's monkeys like screaming, and there's like parrots squawking, and there's like and the neighbors are like, and I'm like, no, I just watch I watch Animal Planet. I watch like I've got some stereo equipment. Maybe I should keep it turned down. And it was one of those things. He's like, I'm gonna freaking get you or whatever, And
so tell them part of the story. Okay, so these things there's a lot of defecation going on in the home, right? Yeah. So, which leads to the big problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we'll talk about that, because a lot of biotoxins were basically happening underneath the carpet, mold, but other bacterias that were forming, which led to his very deep rooted illness. But tell the part of the story though, because all of a sudden Dad comes in. You kind of started that part. They do an intervention on you, right? He comes in. He sees this. You said his face was just, absolutely. You still see that face in your brain. Yeah. And then what was the first thing that he said at that point? But I want you to tell the story about how you just avoided the landlord. Literally dead monkey in the freezer.
Well, and it's important too to understand that like whenever you have a situation that's a complete catastrophic disaster, it like this, and like in this situation, all it is it's a reflection of the chaos and instability that's going on in the brain. It's literally created and projected outside of this.
1,000%.
So you can only imagine if we would have SPECT scanned my brain at the time and gotten Daniel Amen to do it or whatnot, then we would have seen that. And I eventually did when I got a brain scan, which made it extraordinarily interesting not too long after this. But after the intervention. But anyways, when my dad came in.
But hold on a second. Before that though, right, the parrot started dying.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that was the first thing, actually.
Yeah. So
the animals started dying like one by one in this. So
monkeys started dying.
You alluded to this, right? Yeah. Like the air quality in there, and this is the really important part. It was just like what led to me getting sick. It wasn't just this, it was the right genetic susceptibility with the already, pre-existing metabolic fragility, right? And a full bucket, physical, chemical, emotional. And then the toxic compensatory behaviors, these were about as toxic and compensatory as it gets, right? When you load it to where the system just explodes. The air quality in my apartment was so extraordinarily toxic because you can imagine. Well, first of all, we found out that there was Stachybotrys in there later on, right?
Which is a black deadly mold,
right? Which you talk a lot about, right? It's just one of the major causes in and of itself.
Yeah.
If it were just
that. Just that.
If it was just that.
Yeah. All right.
But I ended up with all these exotic animals. obviously everything that I was doing at this point was biting off way more than I could even start to chew. So of course I wasn't thinking about how to clean up after them or anything like that.
Yeah,
When I was about to get a giraffe.
You weren't, yeah, exactly.
I wasn't
Stop there. Yeah.
I wasn't in big picture mode, right?
Yeah, you weren't cleaning bird cages.
It was day to day, exactly. It was like, that
let alone monkey cages.
So you can imagine the amount of animal waste that builds up in a confined environment like this, right?
Oh my gosh.
Whether it be monkeys, fish, dogs, parrots, all that stuff. And it would get to a point where the air wasn't even like breathable. And I was so out of sorts, like on these drugs every day. It took a while before it even affected me, before I was even aware of how I was feeling or anything like that. But I was living in this. And then it did get to a point where I had to clean aggressively, but I was cleaning like inefficiently, obviously. I then went and just bought as many chemicals as I possibly could and was just dumping them everywhere. Because I was in mode where I was like, I just got to get this cleaned up, like in case the landlord that's what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking
he was threatening at this point, busting in.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking my health or anything at the same time.
I just got to get
this
presentable.
Yeah, and I remember, I started doing that after the first parrot died, right? Because my African gray that's supposed to live 80 years just died randomly.
Yeah.
The metaphor, the canary in the coal mine, right? This is literally like what that means is like birds are more sensitive to environmental toxins. So if you're down in the coal mine, when the bird dies, you know that like it's coming for you type of thing, like the air quality. So the parrot dies and I was at least had my wits enough about me that was like, okay, I got to start cleaning up and it was a horrible thing. Like the parrot just died, and it's like I spent all this time teaching him to dance and sing.
Sad reality.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a great animal. But so then I went and bought a bunch of cleaning products, and I remember just like taking the lid off of like canisters of like Lysol or Febreze and starts just like dumping stuff everywhere. Like I can't even imagine a world in which I would do anything like even in somewhat proximity to that today. Like I live like clean organically.
The monkey died too. One of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in the midst of that, it was after that I put on top of the sort of the biological toxicity, which would be the animal waste and the mold. Now I've got industrial toxicity on top of that, which are the two main buckets of toxins, right? You know, is like, so you end up with like insane amounts of like the worst cleaning chemicals because I'm just trying to clean everything up. And I was doing it so aggressively, right? To where the air almost became unbreathable just from the chemicals alone. And that was the point where the monkeys started to die, or I had one monkey that died, and then I was able to get the other ones. I had enough wits about me to like get the other ones out of there and rehome them at that point. Thank
God, yeah.
Thank God for that, yeah, right. But so I walk in one day and one of my monkeys just is dead. It's just dead or whatever. And then I was, I remember like trying to like resuscitate him. I didn't even know what I was doing. So I was trying to resuscitate a damn monkey, right? And it's like this is nuts, right? I swear this is a true story, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I remember having that moment where sort of kind of everything kind of came. It was definitely a sobering moment where I'm like, well, first of all, what the hell do I do with a dead monkey? Because I didn't think about that. I wasn't thinking about.
So you did what most people do. This is like a movie. You put it in the freezer.
Well, because I was in it. So I was in a state. I was in Arkansas, which happened to be a state I kind of found out later in which owning monkeys privately like this was like not legal. But
so now you were concerned.
I was going to these Tiger King like places to get them. Right? Yeah. And so I ended up with this, and monkey dies, and I'm thinking, what the hell do I do with this dead monkey? I call the breeder, the person. I'm like chewing him out, whatever. You sold me a faulty monkey or something. I was kind of like blaming it on them or something, which was dumb. And they told me to put it in the refrigerator and then have it sent off, and they were going to do some testing on it or whatever. And I put it in the refrigerator, and being on the drugs that I was on and the completely like amphetamine-induced psychosis I was in, I forgot about it somehow, which you can't even imagine, like forgetting about something like that.
I can't imagine.
I forgot about it.
I don't think I'm sleeping knowing that there's a dead monkey in my refrigerator. I'm not
exactly.
Sleeping.
But again, this is
just psychosis.
Drug story, right? It's like meth. I was on that level. I was on a meth level with Adderall. So this monkey ends up in my refrigerator, and I think that I stopped staying there. Actually, was what happened for a while. I think I left for a while.
Probably because your health started.
Yeah,
right. Okay.
But anyways, I got to the point where I was going to be like, either the lease was up or I was like getting evicted or something, and I came back and I was trying to clean it up before Ubab, the landlord, came in. He comes in because he would have like freaking
literally
reported me, like had me, or he would have like charged me like who knows how much for the damage and all that kind of stuff. So I was trying to, I knew I was going to have to pay like, a few $1,000s in damages, but I was like, okay. So anyways, I get like two of my friends, right, which are horrified and they're laughing as they're seeing it, right, because they don't have full context. They just see some of the stuff that's in there, like, what the hell is this? And we spend like a whole day cleaning this stuff up. And Ubab is supposed to come in supposedly sometime that day, and we're like racing against time. How we ended up down at the wire when we had God knows how long, who knows, but why did you do anything that you do in this story, right?
Yeah.
But so we was like down to the wire or whatever, and we finally cleaned up as well as we put the entire apartment. It was hours and hours. We just cleaned everything, vacuumed it, the whole thing, got rid of as much of what was the remnants, and totally forgot about the dead monkey in the refrigerator, And
so here Ubab's ready to show up.
Ubab's ready to show up, and we think I finally kind of sort of sat down on the couch, and I was like,
"Oh my God, dead monkey in the refrigerator."
Well, no, I didn't. I was like, I told my friend, I was like, "Hey, can you go just check to make sure there's not anything left in the kitchen or whatever?" And then they opened the refrigerator door, and they like freaking screamed, like a very feminine scream.
Oh my gosh.
Very high pitched, right? And I'm like, and I knew it instantly whenever I heard it.
Yeah.
Like where a memory just comes back to you.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh my God.
Oh crap. And like literally right at that moment, or like maybe 10 seconds, but the craziest thing, knock at the door, and it's Ubab at the door, right? And I'm just like, he's gonna come in, he's gonna see this thing. And it's on the second level too. There's not a back door or anything like that. Anyways, so we scrambled really quick, and I ended up taking this monkey, and I hate this because I loved this monkey, but again, the drugs. And I ended up taking this and scrounging around and looking out the window, the bedroom window, and seeing a dumpster. And I remember I just did a jump shot, into it, and it hit the bottom of the thing.
So like as the monkey goes in, the landlord comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
Monkey?
Yeah.
Landlord, I'm telling you,
landlord
this
comes
is a
in,
movie. Your
and
life's a movie. I mean,
nuts.
this part has to be told in the movie, right?
And I love animals, by the way. I hate that this happened.
Yeah.
I hate that happened as much as I hate the fact that I got sick, right?
Yeah.
But
this is what people on meth do. And again, you weren't on meth, you were on Adderall. However,
exactly.
It's a meth equivalent.
This legal situation. So again, horrific story, completely true, but basically that set the stage.
Okay.
We tell some of that because it's hilarious.
I
and it shows
remember
you how crazy it was.
Your father telling me what he had to clean up. I remember him telling me rolling up the rug.
Yeah.
And what was under there.
So I say we cleaned up, but
and your father was sick. Your father got sick for a period of time.
Well, because at that point, the family did essentially like an intervention on me somewhere around, and the sequence of some of these things maybe slightly because
no,
it was the state of mind, and I was already getting sick in this time. But it's like sometimes you don't know, and you do not characterize something as sick until you can't function at all, because whenever it's the tiptoe into illness, right? Like you slowly normalize layer upon layer of dysfunction where it becomes your new normal. It's like so many people like today who are sick, like a huge percentage of the culture, like before the whole, before Bobby Kennedy came in and started raising awareness more for average people. Some of this stuff's like a lot of people didn't even understand that the headaches that they have, the brain fog that they have, the anxiety that they have, the chronic fatigue that they have is them on the chronic illness spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just because they weren't like me, like on these,
it starts
severe,
and works.
Most
of us start with just fatigue, meaning you have trouble getting through a day.
That's where I started.
Then the brain starts going, man, I feel like I can't think anymore. And then all the other stuff.
And for me, it was like that. I was still a pretty normal kid that just had kind of normal sort of like, childhood dysfunctional issues that actually were more rare back then. But I would say the level of instability that I was as a child is actually like
today. It's
today I would be I would have been considered a very high functioning child in what's going on today. So I don't want to make it sound like that it's like it was that bad at the start. It was a very slow, and it was the fact that it all stemmed from a faulty core philosophy, right? Which, look, no harm, no foul, because I was a kid, right? But still, the fact is the fact that because, and my parents love me more than anything in the world. My parents are amazing.
Your parents are amazing people. I love your parents.
And they meant well, but they didn't have the answers.
Yeah.
Because their culture, their environment had built this model of reality.
I remember the day your
health.
dad called me and asked if I would take you on, right? And I remember where I was, and I took an intake, right?
Yeah.
And I remember after praying, because I thought, man, I know what's wrong with him. I just don't know if I can help him.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's like, but your dad said the right things. He says, we don't have anybody else, because I was like, I have to think about taking this case on, because I didn't want to waste your money. Your dad had already spent a lot of money looking for answers. I didn't want to waste anything. So for me to take it on, I literally had to hear from the Lord, and I did, and I called your dad back. I don't remember how long it was. Maybe it was the next day or whatever, and I said, all right, man, I'm going to take your son on.
Yeah, we had spent, so from that time where everything collapsed, and it's fun to tell that part of the story just because it just shows you. And the reason why we go into so much detail, it is relevant because it shows you like how far of a descent into complete madness, like illness can become from someone who started off as a relatively like pretty normal functional kid with just some regular issues that if I had had the right core philosophy bestowed on me, the right advice, I could have easily prevented all of that. A few dietary changes, some detox, some movement practices, some different things, a few supplements.
You wouldn't have went through
and
it.
I would have gone in a completely different trajectory. Now I have all of this education, and there's a deep purpose in it, so we know that. So we're grateful for it. However, of course, we want to definitely prevent that in any place that we obviously possibly can, because I was also an exception in the fact that I made it out of that situation, because that was really just the start of it. That was the start of my illness.
Right.
Because then there was nothing funny about the story going from then on.
Let's progress then. So how did you end up to where I was on the phone with you and your dad?
So basically at that time, the intervention comes down, all of that stuff. I had already started getting sick, right? I was getting sick through that whole time. But right after that, maybe like 2-3 months after that, where I had sort of like exhausted all of my resources, all of the money that I had made. Not only had I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars as like a 19-year-old, but I was actually in debt, thousands of dollars on top of that at this point. But all at the same time too, within weeks or months, I just had this kind of complete collapse physically, psychologically, emotionally, the whole thing. It was kind of weird how it all came to a head. I think just the intensity of it all, some emotional things that happened from just the dysfunction, from like the never-ending like slew of like shady people that gravitated towards this dysfunctional thing. Like I was telling you, the people eating pizza off the floor, like that was a real thing, right? Because dysfunction tends to attract dysfunction, right? It's a law of attraction type of thing. You connect with people that are on the same mentality level, whatever. So, so anyways, it was just this disastrous storm of dysfunction that all came to this head where, eventually the bottom fell out a couple months after that whole thing. And I was actually physically dysfunctional again, even with the Adderall. So I was dysfunctional in a chronic fatigue standpoint, couldn't get off the couch, but still, if I really, really wanted to, drink some caffeine or whatever. No, I became to a level to where my brain was not functioning. I was starting to have memory lapses where I wasn't recognizing faces of people in my family, where I ended up basically having to move back in with my parents because, basically, I mean, this is actually an important part of it too. I went off of the Adderall and everything cold turkey because as I started to get dysfunctional past a certain point and I saw the destruction that was occurring, it was actually, this is kind of a hard part to describe, but because I was sort of in the recreational drug use kind of place, right? As far as, what I was doing, people I was around, I came across psilocybin mushrooms, for the first time with the intent of taking them recreationally. But just like a lot of these medicines that, of course, and I'll reframe this as they can be a double-edged sword, but they also can integrate the mind to allow a person to temporarily get glimpses of dot connecting, to get a larger perspective, to connect dots in what they're doing. They can be beautiful in that sense. Not that, they're a very aggressive tool, obviously, but I did have a visual experience on that particular medicine, that I went into it with a recreational intent, came out of it with a completely different perspective and a sort of internal realization of what Adderall was doing to me. Because it gave me sort of a connected sense to the authentic, like, center of who I was before I sort of went into this altered state psychosis. And it gave it to me in 5 hours in this experience. And so that was where I got the first, but that's just a vision. That's not integration. That doesn't change anything.
Yeah, right.
But, coming out of it, I decided to go off of Adderall cold turkey, right? And so whenever I went off Adderall, all of my dysfunction and all of my deterioration that was already coming to a point, all of the function that I did have in my brain just crashed completely. Because now you're taking away the credit card and all of the deep ditch that you've dug, right, from a deficit standpoint, all the toxins, all the things, Adderall can mask it to some degree. And I decided to go off cold turkey because I didn't think I could do it any other way, because I didn't trust the state that I was in on that drug enough. So I ended up like throwing it in the ocean. Is a long story there, just like a very cinematic way.
Yeah.
But anyways, so now I'm in this completely dysfunctional state and my life is in complete ruins. I have to move back in with my parents. Like I was saying, I was having insane cognitive deficit, like memory lapses. So in my parents' house where I grew up, I had spent, 20 years there. We moved in whenever I was a kid. And of course I moved away, but then moved back in during this time. I couldn't even go for a walk from my parents' house for fear of getting lost, in a neighborhood that I grew up in. I was, again, like I was, starting to question just everything about my reality, my sense of time, my perception of time, of like actually knowing like when it was in the day, in the week, in the month. It was just kind of like a complete sort of like disassociative, like cognitive dysfunction, like crazy. That came from just like brain metabolism that was shot to hell, right? But the good thing is I found out a little bit later on as I started to go into this, because I'm in this totally dysfunctional state. And if you were to just like spend, 2 minutes inside of my body, like at that moment, it was like a torturous place to be. Because think about it, you have no reference point. You're totally, I'm confused all of the time. I can't function on any level really, right? Because I'm just so in and out of everything. And whenever I really, really put my attention on something, like if I'm trying to read something that's like part of a solution or trying to figure out a solution, I could do it, but then I would crash, for a, and it, so anyways, it got to a point where it was like, I mean, I thought I could barely get out of bed before amphetamines.
So
at this
now
point,
you were at your end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that when your dad called me? I guess that's when we started.
No, because that was the start of about 7 years actually.
Yeah, okay.
Where there was this whole period of time
because at that point when you called me, you had already tried.
Yes.
Your dad spent a lot of money trying a lot of things.
The good thing is that I got my heart and soul back.
Right.
At post this situation where I threw away the Adderall and it was this whole dramatic thing. And I had this sort of reshift or sort of recalibration of my perspective to where I had this sort of renewed sense, this sort of holistic perspective of things, and this sort of like wanting to sort of reintegrate like natural practices, because understanding kind of what this sort of like this chemical subluxation, like, fiasco that I went on. I wanted to go back, and I started to become very obsessed with, living with natural principles and finding a way to possibly heal naturally. This is after lots of reading, because this started a stint of about like 7 or 8 years where I couldn't function barely on any level, but I used every bit of my energy every single day from the time I woke up, time I went to sleep, which I didn't leave the house for weeks, months, years at a time, on just scouring information, reading books, scouring, medical, scientific literature, looking at the thought leaders that were out there, the authors that were out there, which isn't nearly as robust. I didn't have like a bunch of podcasts.
I went through
that
this process myself. You just look like you're trying to save your life.
Yeah, and that's where
like you're digging to save your life.
And that's where there was huge purpose in my resourcefulness, because I focused all of my attention of like, okay, now I've got my heart and soul back, and I want the right things. And I don't even feel like at that point, I didn't even feel like that I chose to be there, even though I did. But I felt like I was a kid and some doctor gave me this drug, and then I woke up. It's almost like a a guy in a movie who turns into a werewolf and barely remembers it, doesn't feel like it was him, but he destroyed everything the night before. You know,
what was the Vegas movie called when they went
The
to
Hangover?
Vegas?
Yeah, exactly.
The Hangover.
Exactly.
When they woke up and there was an actual lion in the room.
Exactly. No, it was exactly
It was
like that.
How did we get here?
It was exactly like
How did this lion get here? How did these monkeys, dead monkeys, get in my refrigerator?
Because it's like I remembered it, but it didn't feel like it was me.
Yeah.
That I was still responsible, and I still was like
they
living
felt
in
the same way in Hangover.
the ruins of it, you know? So it was like, but at least I had my perspective back, but my body was destroyed. And I'm like, you know, so at this point, and especially over the 2 years following that, you know, starting into that like 7-year stint, like I became a very rational person because I very much focused
you were
on
totally
just,
rational when I spoke to you at that point. So you had your brain back because you were very intelligent looking for answers, but you didn't have the rest of you back. Your body was unable to, and I had
enough of my brain back to where
incredible. We didn't even know it was mast cell activation. You had it, but we didn't have the
And
name
so
for
over
it.
that 7 years or so, I was scouring for answers, but it was just sort of like I had to go from my old worldview, which is look for the thing, right? The pill, the therapy, the thing is trying to apply the allopathic
and everybody
model
goes for looking for the thing, right?
Well, you went through that.
You know, but the problem is the bucket was filled with a lot of stressors and that was overflowing.
Yes. And that was the point, is like I went through this long period of time where it was like I was trying to apply the same sort of like allopathic, sort of treat the symptoms with the one-off therapies, but just switch to, the natural edition, right? You know, so it was like, vitamin nutrient IVs, it was supplements, it was this and that. And there wasn't anything wrong. Actually, those things ended up getting me well collectively whenever I put them in a system. Yeah. But it was like, it was having to go through and see the things not work and trying one-off things, hyperbaric oxygen,
I did it too.
Stuff,
yeah.
and all that.
I think everyone goes through that,
yeah.
right? But
it was that
when I
time.
met with you, I'm like, okay, look, not that simple.
Yeah.
Right. And you were at the point where you were like, figured that out. Yeah. Right. I'm like, look, you have major neurotoxic issue here. Multiple sources, right? All the apartment, a source, multiple sources, I'm sure, before and after that even. But, and I'm like, hey, we have to get these toxins out of you. The problem is your immune system, your neuroimmune system was on, cellular danger response. Yeah. You were mast cell activation. So detoxing that out of you was very problematic.
Huge. Yeah, because during that 7 years, from the time that I at least realized that I was sick to that's where this sort of chapter 2 of the Odyssey, right? So it's just like the problem was set up, and now I was in solution mode, and I was as serious as it gets, and I was as regretful as it gets. All I wanted stability in my life. I wanted health. I wanted family. I wanted truth, right? Because ultimately, it was the lack of truth. It was ignorance, right? Yeah. What is that parable or that saying? My people perish for lack of knowledge. Exactly. And that's really what it was. It was like, so I had this worldview now where it was like, okay, I'm hungry for answers, and there's nothing that I'm not willing to do to get well, because I just felt
that was you. That's why I think in just part of that first interview there, that I sensed that about you. That you would have done anything. And I knew the only way you were going to get well is with that attitude. Yeah. Otherwise, I wouldn't have touched it. You ended up on Klonopin. Yeah. You can talk a little bit about that.
Let's talk about the sensitivity syndrome for just because that's part
of part of that.
Exactly.
Because that was the only thing that allowed you to be normal.
And so, for people who have never heard of this type of situation, you might have just maybe at a lower level, right? But like, over those years, I continued, like, whenever your bucket fills up to that degree, right, this explosion starts in the nervous system, in the immune system, and it can take a while for that to start to present into a total degenerative, like, inflammatory process where my body was so sick and toxic for so long that I developed a form basically of, it's like PTSD, but except for the body is trying to protect itself because it's been so insulted every single day for so many years.
But by the way, it is PTSD. PTSD we associate with an emotional trauma, right? People in war, people who are abused can end up with post-traumatic stress. But the body doesn't know the difference of physical, chemical, and emotional. So when you're chemically assaulted or in a mold exposure, et cetera, the body does the same response.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's all just occurs like on a spectrum. I think whenever people hear the term PTSD, or at least classically, maybe, years ago especially, they think of like, people who are highly sensitive to emotional triggers because of the traumatic emotional circumstances they've been in. Their bucket has been filled emotionally, something that they've had to do in war, something that they've seen, abuse of some kind, right? Which all of that feeds into it, but it extends. The picture of PTSD is post-traumatic stress, and that means all the stressors, right? And kind of like, it's not a new stress, but a stress that has reached a level that it's actually like where the lid is like just sort of blown off culturally.
And by the way, I call it a perfect storm. Typically, it's three stressors that come together: physical, chemical, emotional, and it doesn't matter. Boom.
Yeah.
And then the bottom falls out. The bucket overflows, right?
Yeah.
You end up where you are to a level even of sensitivity that you can't eat certain, most foods. You can't be around any chemicals. You all of a sudden your life just implodes on you.
And it's a loop, right? Because the more you accumulate, physical or chemical stress, and chemical stress is kind of the elephant in the living room for a lot of people, because it's the hardest for people, not as much now. The culture is starting to kind of get wise to this idea of like foreign chemicals in our food.
Yeah, we're at a different place.
Yes, and we're getting there, but we haven't quite got to the place where people really understand the bioaccumulation issue, right? That it's not just about what you're eating today, it's about what's accumulated over years.
People make that mistake. Right? It's years, right? You don't get to where you and I got in an episode, right? Or a toxic, toxic exposure. It was what accumulated over time.
And it's also how a lot of, chemical companies, food companies get away with things with science for sale and so on. Because
this level is safe.
Exactly. But it's like, I think it was Brecca who said this, Gary who said this, and I love this. It's one of my favorite things that I've heard him say, is that it's not the dosage that makes the poison, it's the cumulative dosage that makes the poison, right? And it's so true, right? And it's just like, whenever you have something that's just toxic enough, or that's fat soluble, that you eat it every single day, it's a death by 1,000 cuts type of situation. So that's where I was. And of course I had a couple big things like the Adderall, but that wasn't the reason why that situation blew up the way that it did, was because the system was already fragile. It was already vulnerable. So I was like, it ended up in this horrifically disastrous circumstance situation. But as far as the PTSD thing, whenever the bucket starts to fill up with all of these chemicals in the tissue and in the brain tissue and the hypothalamus, the pituitary, affecting all your hormones, all of your emotions, the way that you see the world or don't see the world, how you interact with your relationships and your friendships, and how you interact at work and can't focus, all this stuff, anything that's like all this instability, right? Then that creates more emotional stress and trauma, because being unstable is the quickest way to be to be highly vulnerable to, anything that happens from an emotional trigger. Because the things in our life, the stressors aren't the things that actually traumatize us. It's the impact that they have in a susceptible system, right? In PTSD, right? It's not about the trauma. It's about the impact that trauma had. It's why two different people can be exposed to the same trauma in one person.
It's the ability to adapt or not adapt.
Exactly.
If you adapt to a stress, it actually, arguably, even an emotional stress, makes you better.
Right.
But if you don't adapt,
then it has massive impact. That's why some people could just have amalgam fillings and end up sicker and more psychotic and in a worse place than a person who got hit by an IED, like in the Iraq War or something, right? Which you would think like, oh, you don't have anything to worry about. You have a good life. But these hidden stressors, with the right genetic susceptibility, it's a different equation.
And they even keep you from adapting to other stressors.
Exactly.
Normally. So the premise is called hormesis. If you adapt, you get stronger, smarter, faster, healthier. If you don't adapt, you get sicker, weaker, dumber. It's like, in the ability to adapt keeps going down to the point is you can't adapt to even a sniff of cologne.
Right.
Because your ability to adapt to that stress.
And this is what sort of led me into this syndrome. Some people call it environmental illness. Some people call it multiple chemical sensitivity. Some people call it Gulf War syndrome.
Yeah.
Because it was documented. A lot of veterans coming out of the Gulf War, chemical warfare, got this type of illness. But the most severe form of PTSD, probably, where the bucket is so full, physically, chemically, emotionally, whatever the equation is for you, or combination of factors that fills up your little pie chart, or whatever ratio it is, the body it can't adapt anymore, right?
That's right.
Because its defenses, it needs available energy, it needs resources, and it depletes everything to the point where it starts having the inability to be able to adjust discernment on what is a friend and what is a foe. So it starts with you not being able to tolerate things that actually are inflammatory, that are bad for everybody, that cause maybe like gluten or things that can cause inflammation in a large number of people.
Yeah, the perfumes, the colognes,
Exactly.
your body's going,
But then it ends up in a situation where now there's such a loss of access to your body's intelligence and of its discernment, where you can even start reacting and it starts rejecting things that are actually fundamentally good for you.
Yeah.
Foods. I eventually got to the point where water, right?
You could only drink one water.
Yeah.
That water right there.
Yeah.
Look familiar?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mountain Valley Spring
I carried
water.
that around for years. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, it was, so it started slow. In that 7 years, as I was scouring for answers, I was on this slow deterioration path where I was getting more sick, less adapted, more fatigued, more brain fog, all that stuff. And it was like a race against time because I was deteriorating and I was trying all these one-off therapies and blah, 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 blah. And I always kind of would say this, you would probably agree with this. It's just like the picture of how you reconstruct a person, get somebody well, or anti-age or anything like that, is like, it's always systems that get people well, right? It's not any single thing. Usually it's lifestyles, it's systems. And, each strategy or each thing that you do, right, in a protocol or, a lifestyle that actually gets you well is like a brick in a house. If you're trying to build a new house, a house is made out of bricks, but a pile of bricks is not a house. That you have to like learn how to arrange these things in a system, and then continue that system for long enough to where you build a strong foundation and all that. But first, you can't build a house in a junkyard either. So you have to clear the landscape to where you can actually build something. Yeah. And so I say all that because that's 7 years where I was actually focused and I was getting these pieces and they were just like swiveling around. And it was like, so by the time you and I met, like it had been 8 solid years I'm reading every single day. And it wasn't until that I think it was, I saw some of your content, because I got to a point where I pretty much knew everybody that was out there. Yeah. And it was like, whenever I watched the content you were making, which was some of your earlier content, but it was still like so far ahead of its time. Like it still is, right? And it's because you actually went through it yourself in the same way that I did. Yeah. But it was like, it's sort of, you helped to sort of arrange all of these pieces that I already knew were relevant and like, oh, this is the system, and sort of given it a name. So it's like you put a name on the brochure that I already, and I'm like, yes, like you just know, sometimes you see something, it resonates with you on a cellular level. It's like, this is true. Yeah. This is true. It's like, I don't even need, but I just knew it, especially because I just been down the road, and it's like, I know that I have to approach detoxification in some way that's more comprehensive, because if I could have just stopped the input of a lot of these things if I nipped it in the bud at an early age.
You had so much in your tissue.
But now it takes a forensic strategy, to do it. And it was like all those years of like having these pieces put together, and then finally around the time that you and I met, they started to be arranged in an actual worldview, which was great. Whenever you and I first met, it was like, okay, now I know generally what I need to do. The problem was I had deteriorated to the point where my body wouldn't allow me to do it. Right?
Yeah, we were stuck.
Yes. And so my sensitivities, I had such an inability to adapt that it started with losing, like earlier on in that 7 years, it was like losing a food here and there, where I just noticed like my throat would like start to close up, and I had never had anything like that before. And then it was like my foods were dwindling, and then it was like a sniff from a chemical or a perfume, and eventually I couldn't go anywhere.
I mean, same thing happened to me.
Yeah.
For you, it was definitely more dramatic.
Yeah.
Fast forward now, that's when you ended up on Klonopin, because you become so sensitive to the world around you. Yeah. And it made things tolerable. And it even allowed us to detox to a certain point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I became so sensitive and so reactive and unadaptable, right? And the symptoms that I was getting were one of two things. They were either more immunological, right, as far as the flare-up, and meaning that I would swell, that actually get physical anaphylaxis, trachea would swell, or they were more nervous system explosion, where I'd have convulsions and seizures, right? And which would ultimately lead up, to the same thing, because the nervous system convulsions, I would get these, my throat would squeeze, my trachea would squeeze and I couldn't breathe. And it was like, either way, like severe reactions led to me not being able to breathe. So it wasn't like it was just tolerable. Like it was like that for years, but it got to a point where it was like life or death reaction.
And you started, and this happened to me too, you start losing it. I mean, because that eventually affects your psyche. It eventually makes you more fearful. It eventually brings you in a bubble, and that's where you became afraid of the world because the world's biting you. And then things really get ugly because then it gets really hard.
You're living in a totally different reality than most people because your natural systems that you use to perceive and adapt to the world around you are completely different at that point. And so like normal things that everybody does are like make or break things for you, and you appear crazy. And you get to the point where you actually are. Yeah,
that's what I always say. Yeah, I was crazy, but I was, there was a reason why I was crazy.
You're partially crazy, but you still, the basis of what your viewpoint is, what your vantage point is not at all crazy. But there's so much noise that you can't even discern like what's actually reasonable, what's not. You're just freaking sick of reacting all the time. And you get to the point where it's like, it's like stacking, right?
Yeah.
Anytime someone does something to you, you react. You get to the point where you're ready to punch someone if they walk into the room with a perfume on that makes you react.
Because you're in a fight or flight moment. Well, you're living in a flight or fight. I was there too. And it's a point that you just want to die. I mean, I said I'd rather die than live my life like this. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of living my life like this.
Yeah.
You end up at what we call building 7. And because, by the way, there was back then, I mean, there was a group of people with this. Today, there's a lot more people with this problem. But, you ended up going down to this place where these people pretty much checked in.
which was right before, probably maybe a year before you and I first met. That was sort of where I ended up. It was called the Environmental Health Center, and it was Bill Ray's place.
Yeah,
it was
Bill
Dr.
Ray.
Bill Ray, and anyone who does research on environmental illness, on doctors who have cataloged and sort of helped to sort of establish mechanisms for it. It's like for the past few decades, you're likely to come across that name. He was such an interesting guy. He's passed now. Brilliant guy, but he was from a different time where he did actually a great job at diagnosing the issue.
Yeah.
But he didn't really have a lot of strategies for fixing the issue because it had evolved past him. When he first started, it was like, we know you need a detox. We'll put you in the sauna or this and that. And it was like, so I ended up at Bill Ray's like thinking that this was the place because I heard about it and whatnot. And I was there for about a year or so, getting worse. But I was still in this sort of like, this clean housing, right? Which was sort of like, basically like quarantined. Which is kind of, it's funny now because it was like quarantining before it became, before it was a thing.
Well,
right?
everybody in there was so sensitive that if you walked up with a cell phone, they would hit the deck. They would go running. I mean, and they'd curse at you.
Well, because imagine like, there was something that was like, that was ironically cathartic in the short term when I first got there, because I stepped into a whole community of people who were exactly like me. And I was like, holy shit, this was, it was kind of therapeutic at first. And then it became totally not because it just compounded everybody's it was like crazy.
No, I mean, you become more and more, it perpetuates.
Which I actually knew that I couldn't heal there for that reason alone, not even just aside from the fact they didn't have like good
because it literally, it cements the identity. Yeah. Right.
Well, just because everyone is so angry and paranoid too, and they're just mad at the world once they realize, because most of the people there became educated, Environmental Health Center did a great job of educating people. Like, these are all the things you've been exposed to in the bucket theory and all that stuff. And then, but without an actual solution or a sort of vision of hope for the future or blah, blah, you meet people there at Building 7 that have been living in those quarantine housing for 20 years. Yeah. Like, and I'm like, hell no. Hell no.
That doesn't seem like a solution to me. No. When I became sensitive too, there was a group of people living in like porcelain trailers in Arizona, right?
Oh, for sure.
And one thing I learned is that I said, well, how long have you been here? I realized nobody was getting better from avoidance, right? So pure avoidance, I realized, wasn't making people better. Matter of fact, quite the opposite. They were actually all getting worse to the point where any little chemical would literally, I mean, even the smallest amount, like I said, a cell phone, they couldn't handle that stress. So I realized what I needed to do is stay integrated, but get my body stronger, and what that took. And so I had a different approach. So
Exactly. And that was the big sort of, core, philosophical shift that I think I kind of sensed that the whole time, but just for lack of any other option ended up there. And I knew it from the second that I got there. I was like, this is not me. I'm not that person.
It's that premise of hormesis. That's when I really started studying it because I was so sensitive. I realized though, a certain amount of stress I'm going to have to tolerate. I have to find that level that I can tolerate and then increase my tolerance in my adaptation, my ability to adapt. And that took me into the cell. That took me into everything I learned in the cell. It was about increasing adaptation, or what they call the hormetic ceiling, not complete avoidance.
Yeah, and these are things that you have to, because you lived it so raw and experienced it on the day-to-day, there's like hardly anything else. There's two ways to grow, right? There's desperation, there's inspiration, right? Yeah. And desperation, of course, is the strongest because of it's strongest in the immediate, right? As far as like, because our survival mechanism that's so deeply embedded in us. Like if you're like, when your back's up against the wall, when you're dying or your family member is dying, it's like, that is one way that people just just freaking get focused, and I'm like, okay, all right. Complete. It kind of cuts through the bullshit, and all of a sudden now you're actually like, okay, I just want to know what's true, what's real. That's the only thing that's going to save me. And that was one of the big blessings in it, is just I was in a situation that I couldn't BS my way out of.
Yeah.
No story that I could tell myself was going to, nothing was going to do that. But the goal always is to change that fuel source. Immediate desperation is good to get you started, but you want to change the fuel source to inspiration as soon as you can, because desperation also eats you from the inside, right? Over time. Yeah. And that's why I always would say that there's a fine line in these illnesses between, and these are extremes, but even just mild things that are still on the same continuum, right? Like all the chronic stuff, the regular chronic stuff. It's like there's a fine line between awareness and paranoia, right? Awareness is super healthy, and paranoia is not, right? And especially today, when we start to realize, it's so easy to kind of go into that place, well, everything's toxic and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, it does get to a point where it's not helpful. It's like, it's reframing it of like, okay, but this is an opportunity that I can like strategize my way and create some habits that don't actually cost me a lot of energy every day, because they just become like brushing my teeth. Yeah. It's a different way of doing things. And I stay in the level like, okay, I'm aware of this, but I'm not going to freak out, right? If I'm doing 90% right, then I can take some hits and I can live in the world. And how do I take that pro-health approach instead of that anti-disease approach, right? Because it's like duality. It's like in any spiritual practice around the world, we know this, right? It's just like darkness is the absence of light, right? Disease, like how do you approach disease effectively, or how do you approach darkness? Do you get rid of darkness? Is there something that gets rid of dark? No, you shine a light on darkness and darkness disappears, right? So it's like, it's bringing in health, and disease tends to disappear, right? It's like, and that's really getting rid of the interference, and then amplifying the intelligence of the body through things in our natural environment, the foods, the therapies, the things that are God-given, and it's restoring life into the system, which is what we realize. But being at Building 7 for all that time, and then whenever you and I met, after that, I think the really important part of the story that sort of sets up all of this stuff was that I was kind of at the crux of that, total inability to adapt, but I had at least a perspective and an internal drive that I knew I wanted to get well, which was the most important ingredient, like we talked about. But I had to have tools and I had to have strategies to get me over that hump to where I could tolerate all the things that I just named.
Yeah,
right?
no, I mean, the benzodiazepine, Klonopin was actually part of that, helping you then, but those, because it's a medication, because it's hard on your detox pathways anyway, your liver, et cetera, it has a shelf life of working, right? And then it starts to turn on you. Well, it started to turn on you. And at one point I said, Cam, I know it's the only way you're able to detox, the only way you've been able to do certain things, eat certain foods with that. But you have to find something natural that taps on the same receptors, that has the same effect. And it may not be as dramatic, but you're going to have to find it. And I literally put that onus on you. I said, you're going to have to find it. Because I knew, unlike most clients or patients, you had the ability to research, and you found a list of things, I remember. And a certain type of kava was on the list. And not all kava is created equal. You learned that. And after experimenting with all these different things, trying to find this replacement, this particular strain of kava seemed to work the best for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's literally how this product right here came about. I said that in the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, TRU KAVA, because it's those same strains that you discovered. Whoops, I dropped it.
Oh yeah.
And but you know, it's become more than that. I'll let you talk more about it, but let's get through that, because then fast forward, we were able, utilizing this, we're able to detox you. We're able to get down into it, and you got your life back. But I want to share one more part of the story that I briefly said in the beginning. There was a point before we got to this that you became so sensitive. I think you were trying to come off the Klonopin. I don't remember exactly. You probably do. But all I remember is you were able to only drink 1 water, and you were able to eat about 4 foods. And then it went down to 1 water, 1 food. Then it went down to couldn't even drink that water, and you couldn't eat any food. They took you to the hospital. I think you almost went anaphylactic with an IV. Your dad was telling me the story. And they basically said, Dr. Pompa, they don't know what to do. They're basically sending him home to die. What should we do? He can't drink water, can't eat. I said, well, that means innate intelligence wants to do just that. I said, just let him go. And long story short, you went 12 days without food or water. And your dad said, Dan, how are we going to know when to try to give him water again, because he's going to die? I said, no, his body won't allow it. He'll get thirsty and it'll accept it. And that's what happened. You got thirsty. You started being able to drink water. I think you went 21 days without food or something, 20 some.
Yeah, it was almost a month.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
but I was already so depleted going into that. It was the equivalent of more, for sure.
At least a month. Yeah.
Because I was eating so little foods for months.
You were partial fasting.
I only had one. I had like salmon.
Yeah.
Or I had
because it was like down to nothing.
I had one food for like months before that, and then finally it was like nothing. So.
Anyways, the bottom line is that in that fast, the body knows what to do, and your body eventually started giving you hunger again. I said, John, feed him. So then you started eating again and everything. But then we were able to start to detox again, right? So, but the bottom line is that took you to that bottom, relied strictly on innate intelligence. And then we were able to build from that. And then that's when you actually started utilizing this, somewhere in that sequence. But
yeah, so that moment in time was probably the most intense and meaningful and just absolutely insane like stretch of my life, however long it lasted. Whether it was 12 days, whether it was a month or anything like that. But
without food, it was like you said,
I think most of my my drive and my motivation and my desire for this work, it's not like that it was totally born there, but it took it to a completely different level, because it was like to a level, because I had like 2 near-death experiences during this period of time, and it was just such a level of intense, like in the trenches, full deprivation, that like, you do. It's like one of those pressure makes diamonds types of situations, right? It's like, what was it? Carl Jung always used to say that the stairway to heaven goes through hell first, right? And in other words, if you understand the opposing viewpoint, well, it's like, people who it's like freedom, right? Which is relevant to this, right? Like only people that have been actually deprived of it know what it actually is. Yeah. So you just know, the deeper that you've been down in the trenches, you just know and appreciate and understand more.
That's why I wouldn't be able to help the people I've helped if I didn't go through it. It's impossible. You can't. I would never be able to instill hope or trust, because unless you've been there, man, it's like you just don't understand.
It's the difference between being an astronomer and an astronaut,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a type of lived in desire, I think, that just comes out of just direct experience with something. And it just never leaves you, whenever you're down that low. Like you automatically just come out of it, if you're lucky enough to come out of it with a sense of like, of empathy, you just feel other people's pain more, and it just makes you want to end it anywhere that you can, right? Or help be part of the solution.
And fast forward, it was about getting all these toxins out, that really was key. And without getting them out, because they store up in the tissue, they decrease cell function, and and detox has to be at the cellular level. That's where real detox is. It wasn't about sitting in sauna longer. You know, quite the opposite. We couldn't even stand heat for too long, right? You know, that's how bad we were. But
just deplete the minerals that I couldn't tolerate consuming.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, if it were only so simple to take Corella, right?
Yeah,
you know, we did all that. We tried all that. You know, it is about upregulating that cell function, fixing what's broke at the cell, getting your body to start its natural process of detoxing. That's what we're able to do. But again, we hit that wall because your body's neuroimmune system was so stressed, right? And after the forced fast, we'll call it, your body definitely opened some doors and allowed it. But, you know, why did kava allow us to basically go deeper? You know, meaning you weren't able to tolerate high enough doses. I mean, you were still ultra sensitive to the point where we had to use such small, tiny doses, which works. I teach microdosing today to my coaches on when someone's really sensitive, microdoses can work. I learned it ultimately from working with you and that. But the kava was allowing us to dose higher.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and just to kind of complete that loop of exactly what the situation was will help anyone to understand about why this is so therapeutically relevant for severe situations, but also just in regular.
We'll talk about that because
as far as lifestyle and stuff, just because it's such broad spectrum of use and why it lines up with human biology and is so therapeutic and everything. But I mean, this situation that we were in together, that I was in, was it was one of the more tedious, like, clinical situations that I've ever seen. And not just because I was in the middle of it or something that. It was just very freaking difficult.
Yeah, it was.
And you know, it just required a level of digging and strategy and, you know, attention to detail and being super focused and like super driven to, because I was in a state where my physical willpower was being sapped from me like at an insane rate and all that. And I was just, my body was just barely staying together and holding on. And I'm reacting violently and having these 10 seizures a day. And like you said, I was in this situation where I'm on these very high clinical levels of Klonopin and had been for some time. Once the reactions got bad enough and I was just having seizures all the time, it was just beating the hell out of my body. And it got to a point where I had so few foods that I was having to take Klonopin just to be able to eat food.
I know.
And that was the situation, right? Where it's like, okay, now the things that are good for me, my body won't even tolerate because it's so confused, disjointed, in a complete, you know, sporadic catastrophe. And so being on that drug, another thing that's important to understand about that drug, even more so than a drug like Adderall and whatnot, is how dangerous the withdrawal symptoms can be from this drug. One of the probably the most dangerous pharmaceutical drug in terms of habituation and withdrawal symptoms, because it activates and dumps the chemical that it dumps, unlike amphetamines with dopamine, is an inhibitory chemical that keeps the body stable. It's GABA is the main system that it works on, which is the main brakes of the nervous system. Stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. And basically anything that helps you to feel calm, or any time that you do a practice or something that is strengthening the parasympathetic nervous system and you're able to relax, GABA is being released. It's involved in that process.
Yeah. So
you know,
you have your amphetamines, stimulants, and then you have GABA, the brakes.
Yes, yeah. And now that my body was in this insanely reactive state.
And benzodiazepine types of drugs, they work on that GABA system.
They work on the GABA system in that same credit card type of analogy, type of, type of mechanism. And they plug into the GABA receptors, stimulate them to essentially dump the available accumulated stores of GABA, which works at first, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to a point where you're in debt with your body's own chemistry, but that's very dangerous to deplete that chemical, because unlike whenever you deplete an excitatory chemical, your body just crashes. In a parasympathetic state is much safer than a sympathetic state, right? So if you're stuck in parasympathetic where you can't get off the couch, it's one thing, but your body ricochets in the opposite direction when you deplete your ability to inhibit. So your body just stays in sympathetic, becomes more primed, more reactive, more everything. So classically and clinically, benzodiazepine drugs are a class of drugs: Xanax, Klonopin, Valium, diazepam, anything with an AM is this kind of drug. But that you can actually die from the withdrawal symptoms alone. So outside of how bad this situation was, just from my seizures alone, or from the reactions becoming lethal because it would close up my throat, now I'm in a situation where I use that credit card for a while and it works in the short term, but eventually I deplete my body's own symptoms, and I get into a place where the drug loses its effectiveness, right? Because you're borrowing from tomorrow to pay for today. Eventually that ends up in a situation of dependency, tolerance, because you need more of the same substance to get the same effect because you're going down that road. And then eventually the drug loses its effectiveness to be able to neutralize the reaction, which is what it was doing.
And that's how you ended up basically
because remember,
forced to fast because you became allergic
and this
to your
was so
plant.
complicated. I was reacting to the drug itself. I was reacting to everything that was going in.
Exactly.
So for the drug to be able to work, it had to neutralize its own reaction to itself. So I would swallow the drug, I'd go into a reaction, then once the drug kicked in, GABA gets released, and then it self-neutralized. That's how it works at first, right? Which is an incredibly complicated but really bad situation. But then once you deplete the natural release thing, you get tolerance. Now, you're still reacting to the drug. If you go off the drug, then your seizure threshold goes through the floor and seizures go 10 times worse. They already were lethal, right? So now I'm in this really, I can't even, it's hard to imagine a worse medical situation, to do with habituation and nervous system stuff like this, because it's like, I can't eat food. I can't drink water now. The one drug that could neutralize, I'm reacting to it and all that type of situation.
Can't do that.
So this is like, it's checkmate kind of. That's what it looks like, right? It's like, what moves do I possibly have here? And I had spent years, right, before you and I even met, like going through the litany of every single, adaptogenic or, botanical agent or nutraceutical agent, and trying all the basic ones that at least hit those same receptors, like taking GABA, for example, which isn't the same. It's very mild because it doesn't activate the kind of dumping that the drugs do. Or taking theanine, or taking magnesium, or taking, valerian root, passion flower, lemon balm, all of those things. All of those things, they're all good things. But in my situation, it was a little bit like trying to, shoot a BB gun at a freight train, thinking that it was going to do anything from it. And I had actually tried KAVA, this compound that we're talking about here, that ended up becoming a huge part of my destiny and trajectory in this way that I could have never predicted.
You talk about pain to purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
TRU KAVA was born out of this whole story that you heard.
I had tried KAVA just kind of within the sort of plethora or the litany of these other agents that we just named that everybody kind of knows about and hears about. And you can even find forms of KAVA at your local health food store, right, that were around at that time. And I tried all of those, and they're KAVA extracts. What I ended up learning throughout this process was that KAVA extracts are actually by therapeutic mechanism and composition alone, it's actually a completely different substance by classification standards than the traditionally prepared drink and ceremonial food that's made in these Polynesian countries where KAVA comes from. Because KAVA is it's a ceremonial plant beverage or a tea that's produced out of the roots of this really amazing, highly medicinal plant that grows in specific climate and soil conditions only in this part of the world that we call Polynesia or Melanesia or Micronesia. It's these island chains. Most people have heard of Fiji as a country. Fiji, Vanuatu, Tonga, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Solomon Islands, even Hawaii. It grows in that part of the world. It's a shrub that grows in that part of the world where they use the roots of it to produce this tea, and they squeeze it in this very specific way with water and pressure and produce this full spectrum, like to get the full organism and all of the living constituents and enzymes that come straight out of the plant when it's alive. And it has this, it has this compatibility with human biology because of the way it adapts in the ecology. It plays a very protective role in the ecology. It develops these characteristics energetically and through chemistry that's consistent across all of biology. So when people consume it, it transfers that adaptability to us. And it hits on every single neuro and tissue protective pathway that we know of, actually. The GABA system we know of, it hits on that one. And that's a key part of the story, is because you and I were very focused on that particular system because we knew that it had the potential to give me the leverage.
We were just trying to duplicate Klonopin again naturally, right?
Yeah.
Because it worked for a while until it didn't.
And so we knew since that drug worked, we knew that was the key mechanism, which wasn't a hard thing to figure out, but it's not so obvious to some people whenever they're looking at, you go like medical cannabis, it doesn't hit that pathway in a direct way. It goes through the cannabinoid system, which is like the regulator of all of them. And because it's indirect, there's far more opportunities to react on the front end, and it didn't at all translate as a therapeutic effect for me. It made things worse.
Yeah.
Of course, I went the CBD route, of course, and that was like when CBD was not at all. Like that was like you had to go into the trenches for that one. But you know, and so I had been through this whole thing. I had tried almost and experimented before I became so sensitive, and read extensively, you know, about, you know, every therapeutic herb in traditional Chinese medicine going back 5,000 years, every therapeutic herb in Ayurvedic medicine in India going back at least as long, every therapeutic herb in you know, Amazonian medicine or Native American folk medicine, all of these ancient systems that actually, there's actually a good amount of literature on so many of these different major herbs, the ginsengs, the reishi mushrooms, all these things that are starting to become popular today were not as popular back then at all. But the Chinese have studied them for so long and used them clinically because their practices over in China and a lot of these countries around the world integrate herbs, as where the American system that we have kind of in this corporatocracy that's driven by pharmaceutical companies. If you follow Bobby Kennedy, you'll definitely know that. But our system evolved into this thing that was almost exclusively drugs and surgeries, right? And they're very useful in therapeutic like emergencies, like they were for me for a short time. If you need a surgery, all that kind of stuff. But drugs aren't healing anybody, right? It's so because they're not part of the intelligence of the body and whatnot. And there's intelligence in a medicine like this. But that pathway became so relevant in this situation whenever it's like, you and I had the conversation of like, just kind of, I remember even not having the conversation in a super like freaked out way. I kind of got to this place where I was just focused, where I was just like, you know, I was terrified because I knew that if I didn't do something, I was going to die in a short, you know, in a short time. And when it finally crossed that threshold, it was after you and I met where I couldn't drink water anymore. The body became so reactive. It was like one day I couldn't drink the water. And so now
here it was what?
Yeah.
Here was the only water he could drink.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the irony that we have it here.
And
no other reason.
Well, I couldn't drink that during this period.
No,
that was the first one I could drink once I got over this hump. But you know, the Klonopin was losing its effectiveness and eventually lost its effectiveness around the same time. It was almost at the exact same time that it was like, I tried to drink water one morning and I already only had one food. You know, I was down to like, I think it was salmon at that time. I was rotating. I had like 4 foods that I could somewhat do without my nervous system exploding and going to the hospital, even though I was already kind of in there. But yeah, I had I started reacting to water to where it's like I would put a drop of water on my tongue after a couple of days of this and throat would close up, couldn't breathe, completely like, you know, that kind of a situation. And I was in the situation like clinically where we just had to figure out a way out of it. And of course I had to fast and go without water for that period of time. Yeah. And eventually we got to a point after that, however many days that it was that weeks without food. And then eventually that stint without water. It was a long enough stint without water that I should have died from dehydration for sure. And
I actually went back in my notes and I wrote down day 12. That's how I know.
It's just, it was absolutely insane. And it seemed like an absolute eternity because I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Yeah. I mean, dying from dehydration is a unique type of suffering. Yeah. The type of delirium that you experience, near-death experiences that felt like
the body gets water, it crushes cells. You know, I mean, that's
how I survived.
Yeah,
you know?
Of course, because people say, "Oh, okay, you only live 3 days without water." No, not true. Your body can break itself down and get
and how dehydrated I was going into that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You know, my mind was doing things of like I wish the only thing I remember, I had blood running down my throat before it even started to dry up because my throat was so cracked and everything was so dry I could barely open my mouth, you know, because everything was just after so long without water and all that, and it was just horrific. But we were in this. It all came down to this one day where it was that day, right, that you're talking about, like in your notes, where I was still in Bill Ray's place as far as like, because they were the only people that knew how to handle me from an emergency standpoint without killing me. You go into an ER, they'll just start doing stuff to you and what they wouldn't understand it and everything. But I was in an intensive care type of situation, and they put IV fluids in me until my body started, rejecting those, that, and then it went to that.
I think that's
stint.
when your dad called me because he was like, that was it. You know, it's like he's gonna die now, and I'm like, no, he won't.
Well, it got to a point where I think the prolonged fast where my body sort of like broke. And I don't know, I was experiencing such delirium, and I had had a couple like near-death experiences and different things. And I had a kind of like focused intention. Of course, we were all praying, and I had my whole family around me and all that kind of stuff or whatever. But there was one point where I was in Bill Ray's place, and they had this antigen skin testing program, which for most people would actually make them worse in a situation like this. It ends up doing that because it involves provocation testing, which primes the immune system from the outside. It's fine. It's kind of like souped up allergy testing. It's like high level allergy testing. But what they try to do is they try to find what's called an endpoint, which is almost based on kind of a level of like homeopathy, where they take a substance and then they create a dilution of it like 10,000 times. And then they create, and then they provoke your skin, inject a little bit under the skin, and you get what's called a wheal if your immune and nervous system reacts to it. And then, okay, so you get a wheal still. So then they dilute it 10,000 more times, or they go somewhere and you still get a wheal. And then they go somewhere in the middle. It's not necessarily like the more they dilute it that you'll find what they call an endpoint. It's like just basically throwing darts at a dartboard, trying to find a dilution that your body won't freak out on.
Yeah.
And once you find that, theoretically, once it's in, and the body's so intelligent, the nervous system sees that it's not a threat because it hasn't had that knee-jerk reaction, and it can theoretically neutralize reaction. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was in this situation where, but skin testing was lethal on this day because I was going to be dead if it like in hours if it was not. And this last ditch effort, I remember kind of telling him, I just kind of had this, whether it was, I just felt it. We were praying the whole thing, whether it's a God thing. I remember just having it sort of put on my mind. I was like, I got to bring the skin testing back. If we can just find, it's like a needle in a haystack, but finding an endpoint that will work for the Klonopin, then we could get enough Klonopin in my system to where it can neutralize it the rest of the way. But we had tried skin testing me a few days at the beginning of the fast, and oh, hell no. I mean, my body just erupted the minute that we gave the first provocation injection.
Yeah, but as the body fast, though,
exactly,
it was figuring things out.
And that was the point, is that the fast in and of itself was able to stabilize the system to a point to where autophagy was happening. Some of this stuff was happening to where it was able to give me just enough leverage to where it was a risk, but I said, bring him back in. This is like our last ditch effort to do the skin test. So first we had to hope that the first prick didn't freaking kill me.
Yeah.
And then I had to somehow get the right number in like 3 tries maybe, or you don't know how many tries you have. And it was like, they did one, boom, I reacted, but it was less, but it was still like, I wasn't anywhere close near out of the woods. But it was still like that. And just numbers were coming through my head, and I'm telling them like dilutions or whatever. I was like, try this one. It was like 10,000. So I remember just like, try it in the middle or whatever. And somehow we spit out, and they hit it with like I think it was the 3rd, maybe 4th try. And boom. And I was sitting there and I was just like, cause I was in a reaction, all that, cause he was reacting more and more, whatever. And we looked down, he was measuring it. He was waiting, and there was no wheel there. I was like, holy shit. I was like, okay, give me that dosage or whatever. So they gave me that dosage, and then they brought the Klonopin, because they had already made the antigen injectables to do the skin test for the Klonopin. So then I threw back what would normally be my effective dose of the Klonopin, because I'd spent enough time off of it to where it would be effective again if I wouldn't react to it.
Right.
But the reaction was so overwhelming that even the highest dose of Klonopin that wouldn't kill me would be overpowered by the reaction. So I was able to neutralize it just enough. The fasting neutralized the skin test thing. Serendipitously, this numbers freaking came in, and we did this, neutralized just enough, threw that back, boom, the drug kicked in, and I was like, give me the fucking water. You know what I mean? It was one of those things. It was like, and we had this around. My mom just like felt like this. She went and got like a organic apple juice, like a gallon of it, like at Whole Foods, and she was keeping it around because she believed that we were gonna have a point where I'd be able to get it in somehow, and we wanted just like sugar and water at the same time, like something, to just put in the system. And I freaking, as soon as that Klonopin kicked in, all of a sudden I knew the feeling of whenever it actually was like where I had that buffer back, and I was like, I started chugging this apple juice. it was like the best experience of my life.
Yeah.
Like chugging apple juice. It felt like just something living was coming back into my body.
Yeah.
And it just gave me the simplest thing in the world of freaking chugging some apple juice. It was the best tasting thing in the world. It's all relative at that point, right? And it was like, just the glimmer of hope that moment gave me. I was like, this.
At that point, you knew you were going to live.
Yes. I knew that we had a strategy, that we had something. It's like, all I need is a freaking millimeter. Don't even give me an inch. Just give me a millimeter and we'll roll with it and we'll get to the next one. Just give me something, right?
But so you knew this time that the Klonopin wouldn't continue. You were smart enough, right?
Yes.
And then
I knew that was just a short-term strategy, but at least we had a strategy I could get food in while we were working. And then I was like, okay, well, so we'll
because
deal
your
with the
body
next
wouldn't
step
have been able to go beyond. We were right there.
Because I knew that I still had, because I had spent enough time off of the Klonopin and reacting, I knew that it had reset. Yeah. But I only had a certain period of time where we had to figure out the next strategy, right?
Well, then again, back to this form of kava, that became the strategy. Yes. That became what we were able to lean on to get the toxins out of your body.
We went back to the drawing board and it was like, okay, what can we possibly do to stimulate these receptors without depleting the hell out of them, basically, right? Like that actually has a negative effect. And I'm like, and by that point, it's like I had all this list of GABAergic compounds. Maybe we could
remember the list,
do combinations, or we could stack, or we could hit from this angle. Like, how does it affect the receptors? Does it prime? Does it increase sensitivity? Does it increase density, receptivity? What does it do? And it's just like, in knowing kind of how kava was, okay, something. And it was funny because kava was one of those that I looked over because I had tried the extracts before. Yeah, right?
Exactly. And to your point, the extracts aren't the whole plant the way it should have been.
And it was in this time, it was a few days right after I got enough strength back to where we could sort of like talk again after that like crucial day, where it's like, okay, we got to figure out something now to get us there. And I had a strategy at that point that I knew that I had an endpoint for antigens, that I was cycling benzos to buy me a little bit more time so I would get habituated to one, which would cross habituate me across the board, but not totally. So if I switch from Klonopin, so I had like this doctor writing me like prescriptions for all these benzos, and I was like, I had this whole system and antigens and stuff, and it worked because I just knew my brain was doing things I didn't think he was capable of, as far as like of calculations and pattern recognition. It's amazing what comes out of you in that situation. But so I was back to the drawing board, and like during this time, another serendipitous thing happened, is that I got a call from an indigenous islander that I had met,
I remember.
In our travels. It was just a random occurrence where we didn't meet over talking about kava. So he happened to be like from Vanuatu and whatnot. And it was during that time, and he called me because he was asking me about like something else, like totally unrelated. And for some reason I picked it up. I don't know why, because I was like in the middle of this like dire situation, but I did, because maybe I wanted to hear a familiar voice. I really liked him. I just felt that it was, so I picked it up. We talked from it. I told him, the situation. I was like, actually, man, I'm in this like really bad situation and blah, blah, blah and all that. And we've gotten over a little hump here, but I'm still trying to, and he's like, oh, what are you trying? And I was like, I went the medical cannabis route and all this stuff. And he's like, well, this should be obvious. I mean, I'm sure you have, but I mean, have you tried kava? And I'm like, yeah, like kava, like this and that. And I know, because I knew that he was from, South Pacific. I was like, so you guys are heavily involved. He's like, yeah, my family like has farms and all this stuff. It's like, it's everywhere here or whatever. It's like, we don't even have to talk about it because it's just a given. It's like you talking about coffee, right? Telling someone about it. It's like, of course you know about it. But anyways, he was like, have you tried kava? And I'm like, yeah. And I told him when I tried, and he wasn't being like, facetious. He wasn't trying to be like, trivialize what I was going through, but he couldn't help but laugh, just because he's like, dude, that's not kava, man. Like, that's like an Americanized sort of like, that's bunk, that's not the real stuff. It's an Americanized like form of it. That's like a diluted down form of it. Basically, he's saying the Americans don't know what they're doing with it, because they try to apply cookie cutter like American industry,
the way they extract
extraction methods,
the active
to
ingredients, using alcohol extraction,
exactly.
And
it's to get greater yields, and it's to because we tend to look at things of like trying to isolate the active ingredient and get the highest one, but kava is one of those. Like I was talking about earlier, it's a living organism, right? that plays this amazing role and has evolved and, developed these characteristics that make it so compatible with human biology in this protective way. So it almost has this sort of kinship with the humans and its ecology that have curated it and cultivated strains and whatnot. Beautiful relationship. There's a whole history on Polynesia and how they've cultivated that. They see it as their most sacred substance. But yeah, it heavily relies on the entourage effect, right? Which we all probably know of by hearing it in relationship to conversations around like cannabis of like all these cannabinoids together. It's not just like one active ingredient like a dumb dead pharmaceutical is that just that's just a synthetic molecule that's not even
one pathway.
It's an override to the body, right? And it does it by plugging in and basically tricking a receptor to do something. So you get a payoff right now, and then but it's not part of the body, so the body doesn't recognize it, and so it doesn't work with the body, because it's not intelligent enough to. It doesn't have that capability. It's just a short-term call guy that comes in. But so kava is one of those that heavily relies on entourage. There's some plant medicines like coffee, for example, that have really just a couple most active ingredients, theobromine, caffeine. So when you extract those, it's dirtier. The body doesn't modulate it off as well, so you can overdose on it way easier. Like you can go into the ER from caffeine powder, but you almost never will from coffee. So it is something different, but at least there's still that effect that's there. With kava, the active constituents are these lipid-like compounds called kava lactones.
Yeah, kava lactones.
And lactones are like, they're these oil-like, it's this oil complex that whenever you extract it in heat and pressure, whenever they make it indigenously in these bowls, like in the villages in these South Pacific Island countries, this shiny oil will sort of float to the top, and that's the living lactone complex. And embedded in the lactones are all different, flavonoids and alkaloids and all different co-constituents and enzymatic complexes. That it's like an ecosystem, just like our bodies are like an ecosystem of hormones and neurotransmitters and mitochondria. There's all these things that you isolate themselves, and it's like isolating one instrument in a musical orchestra. You get like something that plays the melody.
And that's what drugs do. They isolate one of those things. But to your point, they work as a symphony, and then they bring the perfect, literally energy to the body. In these pathways, the very pathways that we needed to calm down.
Exactly. And what I realized that it wasn't only so he had told me that, and he had told me that's not real kava, and so basically. And that made sense to me immediately. It was kind of one of those aha moments, like, of course, because I had read so much about kava, like it'd been a couple of years, but it one that I'd read everything about everything in this, pretty much as far as like history, cultural context. And I'm like, dude, that makes so much sense to me because I read about the anthropological like evidence of kava's usage, its therapeutic use, and how sacred it was, and how whole countries in the South Pacific were built off of kava. Like the social structure is built around them. It's their most sacred substance. They use it for ceremony. They use it for like, deep connection, weddings, funerals, spiritual ceremonies, social gatherings.
Like you said, in Fiji, it's hard pressed to find a bar that's
not
a kava bar.
They have 20 times as many kava bars in Fiji and in Vanuatu as they have regular bars. Alcohol is just something that's present mainly because of tourists and Americans, but it creates this super authentic, amazing environment. And the state of mind is just so natural. Kind of gives people what they want out of alcohol, which is a relaxed, sort of present and engaged and yet desirable and desired state where you're driven, you're focused, you're relaxed, and you're inspired, to connect with other people, but in an authentic way where you feel like more of yourself instead of in a drunk way, right? And so it's like,
well, it's like when you have like one glass of wine.
Yes,
it gives you
exactly
that.
right.
You know
it's
what
like,
I mean, it's like
there's that level, right?
And then once you start going over it, then it starts to detract.
Exactly. Like then you become more sort of in your animal mind, and you're more sort of like jokes are stupid. Conversation gets more shallow the more that you go.
Yeah.
As where like the more kava you consume, it's an entheogenic compound that tends to integrate like left-right hemispheres, and it works on all these systems in the brain to where it has like an entheogenic effect where you become really reflective and empathetic, and they call it a heart opener. And they see it as a spiritual, mental, and emotional, psychological medicine, more so than they do a physiologic, because they don't have the physiologic ailments that we do, because they don't live like we do. So, but it has other relevant applications, as we've discovered over here, for how it is. But anyways, whenever my friend had told me, like, it kind of all clicked for me. It was like, I'd read all this, and I know that, and I felt stupid because I know what we do in America with this kind of thing, but I'm like, yeah, that's why, because there's another form of it that I haven't tried.
Did he source that for you then?
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically he told me, I was like, dude, I'm in a dire situation. And honestly, it wasn't like I was totally sold, like that any natural compound would give me.
But give me some.
But I was like, I'm desperate. And he's like, okay, my family's got some farms, blah, blah.
Yep.
He harvested like one of these like 20-year-old ceremonial grade like kava plants, which is like super strong. And they froze it. So fresh is like about as strong as kava gets, like fresh frozen. And they shipped it to me as quickly as they could, right, from over from the islands. And then he taught me how to prepare it, walked me through the whole process, which I couldn't do. I was so weak. My parents were like squeezing this shit for me in a bowl, for like, it takes like 30 to 45 minutes. And you take these raw roots, and then you squeeze them into a bowl of water, and then you end up with this bowl of mud, right? And man, is it a magical bowl of mud, but it's still mud, right? As far as like the taste and
I've had
and it gets
like
your
that.
whole kitchen gross.
We did
It's
one of my platinum events. Remember, we had
yes,
that. And, and if you get too much of the mud, we'll just say it that way, it'll make you nauseous.
Oh, dude, for sure, because you have all these tannins and root fibers that aren't the medicine in it that come out in it, and it's just when you drink a lot of that, it's just your stomach's just like it gives you'll start crapping your guts out, and you're like, and you're like,
I think Simon. He, just like anything else, he liked the first feel. He like,
we were making it raw.
Yeah,
at that
so
event.
he was just chugging it down. I'm like, Simon, he always overdoes it.
That was like I wanted to give everyone like the raw experience, and people like us like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The average person doesn't, which is why we had to create this. But so
you don't have to experience it like that.
No. We had to basically modernize it and take what was best out of it and keep the intelligence.
Yeah, and this is just packets of
that's the instant powder.
And you have liquids.
You just draw them in there.
You have beverages.
Yeah,
I mean,
you've got carbonated beverages and stuff. But yeah, it's literally just you just drop in water, just like an element packet, like an electrolyte packet, or anything.
Kava's bitter, bro. So you've done a good job. Of course, I've had all your products a lot, but you've done a really good job of toning it down.
Dude, yeah.
Obviously, this is
and that one was from our first batch. The stuff now that's coming out.
That looked like that water that we drank.
Yeah,
meaning like that is exactly what it looked like.
Yeah, exactly.
Our
next batches actually have like sort of a natural, greenish sort of hue to them. We've worked. This was actually from the initial.
And it's good too because the tongue goes a little numb, right?
So
explain that.
Kava lactones interact with nerve fibers in a really interesting way. They activate them and then temporarily create this sort of numbing effect, similar to cocaine, but it's not at all, obviously. In a sense of like it temporarily numbs the inside of the mouth for like maybe 20 seconds. But most people like actually think that that's really cool and enjoyable because you feel it. Like the mind says, I'm getting something even before the effects wash over you. So like that's how you know if it doesn't numb the hell out of your mouth and it's not real kava. Even if it does numb the mouth, doesn't mean that it is. It could still be an extract that's not going to give you a big effect or whatever. But that's basically the situation. But when I was in this situation, he sent over that stuff and we finally made it. Long story short, I started drinking the stuff and literally just like chugging like huge amounts of this stuff. My parents were making it. It was like the kitchen was like a kava producing factory. And it's just like this nasty stuff everywhere, right?
Was TRU KAVA.
Yeah, exactly. It was like totally a homegrown
Many years
situation,
later, by the way. I'm making it sound like,
But I was just chugging this stuff, and within 2 weeks, it was about 2 weeks, I just was not having reactions.
Yeah, no, I remember.
And the severity of the
we
reactions.
were like full dosing detox after that.
It was because this was most shifts that occurred naturally.
I kept saying,
in the body.
What is it? Yeah. Huh? Wow, it's working that well.
Well, because, so when you're in a situation like that, you're used to not seeing anything that's not crazy gradual as far as improvement, right? It's just because the body has to restructure itself. And this still was a type of natural leverage. But what we found out was I mean, first of all, this was just a miracle, and it was just to make you fall to your knees type of thing, right? Just like whenever I just sort of like in 2 weeks, it was like, I remember like trying things that I was reactive to and eating like without Klonopin present or something like that, and sort of like wincing, or whatever, and then just waiting,
punched,
and just waiting, and it's like, it's like, what the hell? Like, how is a natural stuff? Like they were trying like phenobarbital, and you know what I mean? And it's just like, it was one of those things that after 2 weeks, because there's a cumulative effect to it too. There's a reverse tolerance, which plays into it really. It's an interesting component of it that makes it actually the polar opposite of the habituation negative feedback loop we were talking about earlier with the borrow from tomorrow to pay for today. Addiction, dependency, withdrawal cycle that comes from the depletatory nature of the synthetics, right? Was that it actually has a reverse tolerance effect. And this has actually been well studied, and the mechanisms have actually been pretty well established and stuff too. But it's always been known by indigenous islanders, and even my friend told me this, couldn't explain it scientifically. I had to fill in the gaps there. But he's like, it has a reverse tolerance, and so there's a loading period. Kind of like with creatine, you have to load, but that's for a different reason. That's actually building up your body stores. Something is happening whenever kava first comes into the body. And it's only the first time you take it too. Like you don't have to like reload after you've loaded once. But that's why I tell people to kind of take the 30-day kava challenge, right? To take it consistently for 30 days. Because there's a priming that happens in the dopamine system, in the GABA system, in the serotonin system to a lesser degree, and in the cholinergic system, but mainly the dopamine and GABAergic systems, we know that there's an increase in GABA receptor density over a period of time. And so it's doing this through just unique plant pharmacology. It's intelligence. And so it's working through multiple mechanisms to not only naturally increase your body's natural production, like sort of turn on the factories, right, that help to produce and release the available stores of GABA, but it's actually making the receptors more sensitive to the signal as well too at the same time. And it's increasing the number of receptors over a period of time is what we see, right? So it's like, it's actually, I mean, GABA is sort of the foundation of the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So what it's helping to do is it's helping to reset, integrate, and to help to rebuild the parasympathetic nervous system and to reset
which so many people
patterns.
Need, right? For multiple reasons.
It's a pattern interrupt that comes in and does that.
This is something that everyone can benefit from, right? I mean, obviously, and obviously with what so many people are going through, in today's environment, if you will, I think it's even more of a powerful, plant medicine, if you will. But again, we can call it a plant medicine because it is, but it's still a food that the body loves.
Yes.
So.
Well, it's a whole food medicine.
Yeah.
It is a medicine, but it's used like we use coffee. We use coffee as a food,
that's
right?
Exactly right. Right.
We break down the beans, and it's the water and pressure extraction of the beans of Coffea arabica, right? And that is coffee. Yep. And so the actual definition of true kava, which is why we named it such, is the water and pressure extraction from the whole full spectrum, properly curated roots of Piper methysticum, and Piper methysticum is the kava plant. And so if you deviate from that and break down that entourage effect, then you end up with something that's a fraction of that, which is difficult to figure out. It took a long time to develop the extraction, the stabilizing and the filtration methodology that could actually produce traditional kava at scale and keep it stable.
Yeah, right. That was the challenge of duplicating what they did in the islands. And doing
but
it
at
here.
A commercial level.
And I've watched you go through that process.
And then the flavoring and all that kind of stuff to make it actually like approachable.
It's brilliant. Well, for time's sake, I mean, we could keep talking. I probably have to have you back on. Where do they get it? Give them all the information.
Yeah. Well, you can go to trukava.com, TRUKAVA.com, and you can find everything there. Yeah. We've got these beverages that people use as an alcohol alternative, right? Because culturally, that's one thing. Because we've been talking about it in the context of like how it was born from out of this sort of, medical application that's profound and amazing. But if something is therapeutic at that level medically, then it has, and it's safe, especially as kava is like one of the safest medicines you can ingest that has an acute effect. Yeah. Because most medicines that you look at are in one of two categories. They either have acute power that you get a quick shift in the neurological system, and that would be drugs, alcohol, all that stuff. So you actually get an effect, recreational or medicinal. Or substances that are more nutritive that just like feed the body at its base, like adaptogens and whatnot, and that you don't really feel, but they build health over time, and so they help to strengthen the body, right? But kava's kind of, it's unique that it gives you an acute effect, but it also works underneath the hood at the same time, which is why over in Polynesia, it is their alcohol and it is their coffee at the same time. So it really is nature's original social tonic. Like right now we have the explosion of this sober curious movement, right? Along with all these other adjacent movements, you know, the rise of regenerative medicine, you know, the rise of biohacking, the rise of personal development, conscious entrepreneurship. All these adjacent movements are sort of like, I think, that come from our underlying sort of underpinning hunger and desire for nature reintegration, because that's where intelligence is. And we've strayed so far with synthetic chemicals, synthetic environments, you know, synthetic everything. And that's really where health is. And it's slowly find a way to where you don't have to go back into the jungle and live there, but how we can integrate that into our lives, right?
This does that.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And in the sober curious movement is one of those things where the culture is starting to collectively sort of just be more introspective and sort of honest about the things that we're using, both recreationally and, you know, for social bonding and all of that. And there's just a slew of rituals, therapies, strategies, and compounds that are slowly moving the culture away from our sole reliance on alcohol and on pharmaceuticals. Not that they're going away. There's still time and a place and all that. But it's one of those things that most time whenever people are looking for something that they can use regularly as an alcohol alternative, you see all these non-alcoholic beverages and so
there's a lot.
And it's most of the theanines, it's most of these ingredients that are more just something that you hold.
It doesn't have the power that this does. This is
and that's the
deal.
point. It's something that actually has a function that you can feel good about using. Obviously, you know, has all these different applications to it, but just as a lifestyle thing that actually is good for your brain. That allows people to connect. So anyways, you can go visit the website and you can go on all of our other content.
Well, visit the website. TRU KAVA, what a story. Share this story. I'm telling you, just that alone, his story, people need to hear, because it'll give people hope, number one. But number two, it's going to give people answers, because our authority comes from the victory God gives us. And God gave us one heck of a victory through you and through me. We both sit here from pain to purpose.
Absolutely.
So like and share the podcast.